is the granddaddy of modular railroading, as John suggested. Before 1973, before the group of young, then young in-scale model railroaders out in California came up with this concept, there were, if you had a layout, if there was anything in a train show in the way of a layout, somebody brought an entire home layout and put it in there. The concept of modular, as John talked about, where anybody can bring one, they all plug together and fit together, was the new concept. It was called NTRAK. So we're going to review the NTRAK itself and let you see how what the standards are for that. So there are standards on a lot of things. Wiring, gauge connectors and polarity, the power, what you must use. And by the way, power is not a requirement, any specific power on NTRAK, unless we are getting a bunch of layouts together, a bunch of clubs together and forming multiple loops with multiple power supplies, and we have a standard on that. Track positions at each end of the module are set so they will all be aligned and linked together. There we go. Height is standard. The elevation of the track, about whether you can have grades or not, is a standard. Curves, radius is a standard. Skyboard height is a standard in the fact that these minimums, curves and skyboards, only have minimums. You can make them as large as you can get away with. And you must provide a couple of C-clamps, because that's how they're linked together. They're clamped together with C-clamps. Size is a standard. And the thing about the original NTRAK is it is variable to the extent that you can have, each module can be as long as you want, but there has to be in increments of 1 foot. So you can have a 2 foot wide, a 3 foot wide, a 1 foot wide, a 6 or an 8, or whatever you can get away with, as long as it's multiples of 1 foot. The depth is standard, 2 feet, and you can extend it or up to 6 inches in the back or in the front. But the middle 24 inches is standard. It must be that deep. The thing is, it's flexible because it snaps to the 1x1 grid, so it makes layout planning pretty easily. And as long as you have a couple of pieces of the odd stuff, you can get away. You can have 3 4-foot corners and a 3-foot corner. With a couple of 1-footers, or with a 1-footer and a 3-footer, you can make it all fit together fairly easy. So as long as multiple module dioramas are available too, which means if you've got 20 foot of modules, you can go between those 20 foot and have anything any place you want it, as long as it meets a standard at the end of that block of modules, that diorama. So here's a picture of a standard 4-foot module. Pretty simple. Some of them get pretty fancy, but again, it's 4 foot from there to there, and it's 2 foot from the back to the front. And that makes it an NTRAK module. We also have corners, inside and outside, 3 foot, 4 foot of the standards, and we'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And junctions are another type of module that came along later. We'll talk about those in a little bit here in another minute here. Here's an example of a 4-foot corner module. You can see it's sticks out, and it looks a little funny because of the angle I'm shooting at it, but it is it has the one corner cut off here and the other corner cut off here, and here's your corners out here at the edge. Other things we do now is we have special modules like balloons, as you see over here on the right, where you can take a little balloon like that, put a couple of standard 4-foot modules between it, put another balloon at the other end, and you've got a nice little layout for a small show. Corners don't necessarily have to be 90 degrees. We've come up with 30 and 45 degree corners that'll let you do some unique things. And we'll talk about how you can use those a little more in a minute. And then large corners of 6 foot or 8 foot, usually have to break those into 2 modules because they get too big and too heavy, and John Kaprowski can't pick them up. Glenn Kaprosky, I'm sorry. And then another thing that's become very popular in gateways is some of us are getting older, ducking underneath these things has become a bit of a problem, and there are ways to get around that. The thing about mating these things, the standard is that you have to stop your track at 2.5 inches before the end of the module, and we have standard Atlas sectional track, which you can buy off the shelf to connect the two modules together. And you connect them with C-clamps underneath. And the other standard is the wiring. You've got to have connectors. You got to have the right number of wires, the right size of wire, and the right type of plug to make them all fit together. And with those standards, everything works, everything plugs. We do have specifications on rail, code 80 sectional or flex track. We added later as it became popular code 55, but there are some restrictions. For example, old Atlas code 55 didn't work because the standard microtrains wheel sets bumped on the tie. Having a senior moment here. They bumped and they made it bounce around. So Atlas code 55 track wasn't used, the original stuff. Got a unitrack with adapters is acceptable now. So we have a lot of things that are standard. The other thing is we're dynamic, but we're also consistent. Standards have been around since '73, and in 50 years that we've been here, only 2 of the standards have changed that required model modifications. And that was the standards on the wiring. As DCC came into effect, we had to have heavier wire, and we needed connectors that gave her less friction, less restriction to current flow. And the other one that was required was removal of the 110 volt power strips underneath the modules, which a lot of fire marshals have made us take them off in certain areas of the country. New standards do not generally adversely affect old standards, and the NRail board of directors is very conscious of this and very protective to see that we don't do anything that's going to screw up a lot of people's modules that are already around. And there is a process when we have a new standard that we're not going to get into today, but it's not done lightly. There are some variations that have changed things. For example, now we have multi-loop layouts that you can put together with the NTRAK modules. We have peninsulas, and that's where I was talking about the junction modules, where you can. It's a T type thing where you can stay on your loop, or you can go out across a little channel to another loop and link to it, and they can all link up together, and you can run around several of them. Peninsulas can be standard NTRAK with a balloon. There was an offshoot called NTRAK that came around several years ago, where you could come out on that off the junction module with a different style of module that just had a single track on it, which was a different concept, but it matched. It was the same height, and you could connect them all up. NTRAK was another such variation that is still around. There was a big NTRAK group at our last National N-Scale Convention in Louisville last year. Dioramas have become popular instead of just a single module, a group of modules. And now we're talking about interfacing with other module types like the T-Track and the FreeMoN, and somebody else will talk about those later. Helixes and other things like that. The other thing that's changed is that we don't have to be rectilinear anymore. This is an example of an NTRAK layout that really does exist and has been taken to shows. Here's where the 30-degree modules come into play in these corners to make this 120 degrees as a triangle. You can take that triangle and expand it and do all sorts of other things. So we don't have to be rectilinear. You can have bumps and loops and all sorts of unusual things. The pluses of NTRAK is that modules are freestanding with legs. They're ready to go. You set them up and plug them together and you're good. There's plenty of space on each module for scenery. And as I just showed you, they're not necessarily rectilinear. There are some minuses. Sometimes they're large and possibly heavy, which can become a problem, but there are ways to avoid that based on the materials you use to build your module. Some venues don't like layouts with large infields, but again, the solution is inside corners, which lets you double the loop back in. And the other thing that we have to have, that we don't have to have, but it looks a lot better, is skirting. So that is the general introduction to what the N-scale modular format is.